Hey y'all, here are OS Reviews. In this video, we're taking a quick look at the Nuu B30 5G Android smartphone. Now, if you're having deja vu, that's because a couple months back, we checked out another device called the Nuu B30 Pro 5G, sharing an almost identical design. So a couple months later, the non-Pro version here just dials down on a few specs. It's still using the same processor inside though, the Dimensity 750, which is a 6nm 2.6 GHz Octa-Core chip, offering 5G connectivity, and both phones still share the same display, which is a pretty impressive 6.7-inch fast 120Hz refresh rate AMOLED display that has a under-display fingerprint scanner and very thin bezels which are almost symmetrical. So I would argue that the performance between the regular versus the non-Pro is 90 if not 95% similar, only differences being that the Pro version has a little bit more RAM at 12 GB compared to 8 GB on the regular B30 5G, although there's 8 gigs of virtual RAM that you can use to borrow some of the storage space to simulate RAM that can still help a bit. Both phones still have the same amount of built-in system storage at 256 GB that can be further augmented by a micro SD card that can also act as a second SIM card slot. And the second difference would be the main camera sensor. The less expensive non-Pro version has a 64 megapixel primary compared to 108 megapixel on the Pro version, although the secondary camera on both are the same at 8 megapixels. It's an ultra-wide angle, and the same macro lens as well as 32 megapixel front-facing selfie camera are still found on both phones, in addition to both having the same 5000 milliamp hour capacity, still charging at a fast 30 watts. So they share a identical build and design, only difference being the colorway as well. The Pro version is a slightly more interesting green shade compared to black on the regular base model. But if you're a fan of a more stealth-like appearance, you could like this. And both phones still come with an included TPU protective silicone case, in addition to a factory pre-applied screen protector. The silicone cases are also color coordinated. The more translucent crystal case shows off the green colorway of the Pro versus the darker black one fits in more discreetly with the regular variant. And even the Pro version from before I thought was a decent value, selling for sub $300 as an unlocked smartphone, and now the regular B30 5G is slated to be even more cost effective. So primarily if you're okay with a little bit less RAM and a slightly less detailed main camera, those are really the only differences. Same processor, same screen, the same glass finish on the back, and the packaging contents are still quite similar. You have a new sticker, user guide, SIM ejector pen, and also a fast 30-watt charger. And so once again, it's stacking up to be a pretty competitive mid-range smartphone competing with the likes of Xiaomi, Redmi, Poco devices, offering pretty strong price to performance ratio. And otherwise, a closer look again at the design, just like the original B30 Pro 5G, it does feel very sleek and stylish, again thanks to the matte treatment of the glass on the rear, but it's cold to the touch. Just like the Pro version though, there is no support for Qi wireless charging on this model, but that's mostly expected here, just an LED flash, and then we have a volume rocker as well as a power key. Frame here is constructed out of polycarbonate plastic, but still feels relatively sturdy. We do have stereo speakers on this phone as well, providing some extra immersion, charging port, as well as the SIM/micro SD card slot. And the device does not have a standard 3.5mm headphone jack, just like on the Pro version, although you can use a dongle with OTG or you can use Bluetooth, and it does have FM radio connectivity. The under-display fingerprint scanner here is relatively responsive, although the placement might be a little lower towards the bottom section of the screen, but overall performance as you're navigating around the UI is certainly not going to be too problematic. We are presented with a fairly clean version of Android 14. There's not too much bloatware or additional customization from Nuu, which is a Hong Kong-based brand. Standards here include live caption support, as well as a power saving mode can be triggered, and the phone, by the way, does have built-in NFC as well for contactless mobile payment. And I stand by my earlier assessment that this is one of the best looking displays I've seen in a sub $300 phone. Not only does it get relatively bright, it's super responsive, but again, the minimal bezels, ultra-wide viewing angles, and eye-popping saturated colors because of the AMOLED nature really makes it a joy to use for content consumption. And since we interact with our smartphones using the display, glad to see that they haven't really skimped on this component. Now it is still slightly curved on the left and right edges, creating the illusion of an even more premium flagship grade smartphone from afar. And I would say accidental triggers aren't too common on this device. Thankfully, the software optimization has been pretty good, so even as I'm holding it down with my hand, as you can tell, the screen still remains responsive without too much ghost touches in my testing. However, if you prefer a flat screen, you can also consider Nuu's A25, which is an even more cost-effective model. However, the A25 does have a weaker processor, namely the Helio G99 versus, again, the Dimensity 750, so it's also going to be a 4G phone compared to 5G connectivity here, not to mention almost 40% faster N22 benchmark score on the 750, this one reaching roughly 420K, and also faster GPU performance, so it's just going to seem a little bit more zippy if you're pressing the phone a bit harder. But performance bump aside, takeaway is I've always been relatively pleased with the display quality on new smartphones, often punching above their weight class. We do have the same customization options that we reviewed with the B30 Pro 5G, namely there is an always-on display mode that takes advantage of the OLED nature here to show a simplified clock even when the main screen is turned off, allowing us to customize the color of the font and text info, so after a few seconds you can still see the time information there without even waking up the phone's display. And there's also edge lighting that takes advantage of the curved nature here just by flashing. If you have an incoming notification and you're setting the phone down, you can still partially make out the light that's bouncing on the edge. And under My Tone, you can change the color temperature, making it more vivid versus natural looking, cooler versus warmer, and the default I find to be already pretty decent looking. You can even hide the cutout here for the selfie camera by using a virtual bar, and since it is an OLED screen, it does have very inky blacks because no pixels are being emitted. The touchscreen sensitivity can also be further boosted using a screen protection mode. Even small details here like the charging animation pattern can be customized, as well as the refresh rate. So we can dial it down to something like 60 Hz to save on power. Although it's not LTPO dialing down to just 1 Hz, it's still better than nothing, and it can dynamically go between faster 120 versus standard 60 based on your usage. You can also go into intelligent assistance to find some extra features like the aforementioned virtual RAM expansion. Not quite as good as real RAM, but still with virtual 8GB you can get up to 16 gigs. You can also activate smart gestures, including answering a call when you pick up the phone if it's ringing, plus gestures like taking a screenshot by swiping down with 3 fingers or swiping up with 3 fingers to enter a split-screen multitasking view, and it still seems to work decently when it comes to responsiveness. Lift to wake as well as double tap to wake the screen and even double tap to lock the screen are all features that you can trigger. So for example, if we tap now twice, we can turn the screen off, twice more to turn the screen on, similar to LG phones back in the day. Last but not least, 2 final features I wanted to highlight include an edge bar that you can tap on hold for a couple of seconds when you're swiping over to trigger some of your commonly used programs. You can also tap on here to rearrange and add some of your favorites over. And this gesture works on both the left as well as the right sides just by holding for a split second longer as opposed to just going back by one screen. It's a function also found on some Sony Xperia phones, so a pretty thoughtful consolidation of some of the features from various launchers over the years. You can even long hold on the volume up key for a couple of seconds when the phone screen is off to quickly open the flashlight. So this is basically their alternative to the chop motion on Motorola phones. So you get the idea. Nuu has done a pretty good job of customizing the overall software experience, but at the same time it doesn't feel too bloated either. Closer look at the launcher, we can swipe over to the left to access our Google Newsfeed, pretty standard. All the Google essentials including access to Gmail, YouTube Drive, as well as the Play Store can be found here. And there's also a built-in kind of help assistant. If you're troubleshooting any questions, you can find their support there pretty easily. Aside from that, there is just a basic compass as well as a sound recorder is found here, in addition to the aforementioned FM radio, and that is it. Everything else is completely stock to regular Android. Now we can also long hold for a couple of seconds here to find 2 different UI modes. There is the standard, which includes the app drawer, in addition to one that includes all the apps on the home screen. We've also got a handful of custom wallpapers from Nuu that are all quite vibrant looking that you can use to customize the layout as well as how the icons look. We can turn off the themed functionality if you want to revert back to the color method. And now jumping into the camera UI next, it's a fairly classic layout. Similar to the B30 Pro, you'll find access to an AI mode that can detect different scenes, adjusting the color saturation for you automatically for some added vibrancy, and you can turn this on or off. In addition to HDR, can be used simultaneously with the AI scene detection. You can turn on and off flash and apply additional filters of your choice as well, such as monochrome. And then down below here, you can go into the ultra-wide angle lens versus a 2x digital crop. Some advanced settings include include turning on and off the shutter sound, geotagging. Video here does include EIS or electronic image stabilization, but the camera does not have OIS. Now you can also swipe left and right to go through functions like a night mode that will increase the exposure time, but you have to hold still. Glad to say that with the primary camera, you can record up to 4K 30 FPS. There's also a portrait aka bokeh mode that will use the secondary camera for depth information. A beauty mode can also be triggered if you want to touch up the skin as you're capturing a shot. Ultra-wide-angle panorama, and under more is where you'll find the macro lens, pro mode, which allows you to change properties like ISO and white balance manually, in addition to take 64 megapixel images. So here's one example. Using the full 64 megapixels will take up roughly 24 megabytes of memory, compared to the default, binning down to 16 megapixels will take up 9 megabytes of space instead. The 64 megapixel mode does not support HDR or AI scenes, so the overall colors, for example, are not going to be quite as vibrant. However, you are able to crop and zoom in a little bit more with the additional megapixels of detail. Case in point, this is as far in as we can go on this particular tree, compared to on the 16 megapixel shot, this is the equivalent length that we're able to pinch into. So if you are doing a lot of zooming and cropping, that might be one advantage here. Takeaway is this is not a shabby camera. Details are sufficiently clear, colors are also quite vibrant thanks to the AI plus HDR. Even textures in the shadows still look decent as well. In fact, I wouldn't say it's too different, to be honest, compared to the B30 Pro 5G, even though that one technically has a even higher res 108 megapixel sensor. But since in most cases it's getting binned down anyways, and the color science is almost identical between the phones, I'm honestly not noticing too much of a perceivable difference, so it's not that big of a compromise in my opinion, and it's not going to be perhaps to the same level as the latest iPhone or Pixel, but there's a huge delta in price. Here's also the 2x digital crop, and at this particular magnification, I wouldn't say you're losing out on too much details yet, but if you're going even further in past 2x, that's when you see a bit more digital noise start creeping in, but it's alright for a light crop. And you can also find an example here of the ultra-wide-angle lens. It is getting you more within the frame of the shot, but at 8 megapixels, it's a noticeable drop in resolution compared to the primary lens. However, you don't get too much lens distortion. At the very least, the edges still look relatively straight, so it's nice to have, but would have liked to see a even higher res sensor for the ultra-wide, maybe in a next generation model. Likewise, the macro sensor isn't going to be the most practical. It's nice to have for some maybe fun shots, creative shots every once in a while. You can get pretty close to your subjects. However, again, the resolution is quite low, and generally speaking, a telephoto zoom lens would be more useful, I think, but it is what it is. Now moving into a quick demo of video consumption and the built-in speakers. Alright, so turning the volume down there, takeaway being that the stereo speakers are definitely helpful to make content feel more immersive as you're holding it, particularly in the landscape mode, and even if you cover up the top section, it seems like sound can still escape from the earpiece. So the audio doesn't sound too muffled, and I would say volume levels are decent. It can get maybe a touch louder, but overall more than satisfactory. The overall display quality, again, just punching above its weight when it comes to vibrancy, very generous viewing angles, and just a joy to behold when you're consuming YouTube. Looks very pleasing on this panel. And you can also access the picture-in-picture mode. Antenna reception quality, in fact, was quite strong with both Wi-Fi as well as 5G. With T-Mobile here in the Seattle suburbs, I was getting almost full bars, in fact, thanks to the plastic band that's being used. And so staying connected as well as scrubbing between parts of a video frame aren't going to be too problematic. Also moving into a quick demonstration of how web browsing feels. As you can tell, the 750 loads up pages very quickly, even more complex sites like The Verge, for instance, with plenty of videos as well as ads on the page, still load up pretty quickly. Even the full desktop version of the site just takes a split second before everything snaps into focus. I was able to open more than a dozen tabs in Chrome and still jump back and forth pretty smoothly. Furthermore, I have to commend MediaTek as well as Nuu doing a good job when it comes to optimizing the thermals. The 750 is actually pretty energy efficient for the most part, even doing more heavy multitasking and some gaming. The phone never really got too hot or toasty while using it, which is a far cry compared to some of the cough Tensor as well as Exynos processors out there, which tend to get quite warm in recent generations. This remains still comfortable as you're using it, cool to the touch. The 5000 mAh capacity battery is also sizable enough to last you through pretty much 2 days on average before you have to recharge the phone, and the 30-watt charging ensures that the phone gets topped up in well under an hour, so also quite fast there. Now, when it comes to doing some casual gaming, I wouldn't say it's too problematic as long as you are having, again, reasonable expectations for a mid-range phone. You can play back more demanding titles like Asphalt, as well as PUBG, even Minecraft, although you can expect maybe some occasional drop frames and maybe just a split second longer to load at the beginning, but honestly, it's still more than playable enough for pretty much any app that you throw at it, whether it's social media, productivity. It's more than a usable enough experience, particularly with such a beautiful display on this particular phone. And so that is more or less it as far as our hands-on review of the Nuu B30 5G, again, the non-pro version that comes in just this stealth black. It's another pretty impressive offering from Nuu as a mid-range smartphone. Although it's no longer the first time that we've seen this particular design, I still like it and think it feels and looks more premium than the price would imply. Performance remains quite good in its price category thanks to the same Dimensity 750 as the Pro version of the phone, just a little bit less RAM and a slightly lower resolution for the main camera, but as touched on in this video, honestly I don't think those compromises, especially the camera, is one that you'll be noticing too much. In fact, I'll say that if you've been on the fence with the B30 Pro 5G and you like this stealth black colorway, it actually might be a compelling alternative just because, again, the performance is almost identical. Great alternative to Xiaomi, Poco, and particularly Motorola, I would say, here in the US, just because some of Nuu's phones are also sold directly by carriers, including Boost Mobile. They even have some offices located here as well. You can check out more details if interested in the links down below, but for now, that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That has been the slightly scaled down Nuu B30 5G.